So glad to be here. Last night dinner was great. The host, of course, Ebony and her family just really welcomed me, and it's been a really great experience being here since yesterday. So without further ado, I'll go right into my talk today, which is called Discourses of College-Going or Criminality. And if you are on Twitter, you can follow me on Twitter at Amalia-Gerbino. So I'm going to go right into the purpose of our talk today is to have critical dialogue on how racialization and geography contribute to terms such as college student and criminal, right? And to understand how these conceptualizations influence local college access geographic discourses for students in urban and suburban community colleges. And again, also broadly speaking to other institutional types as well, which my larger project looked at. But for this talk, I'm going to focus specifically on community colleges because that was the publication that I'm focusing on for this talk. So really quick, I think it's important to set the context. And so I'm going to put up this picture and ask you, do you remember who this is? Do you have an idea? What was it?
Did he shoot up a movie theater?
Nope.
A school?
The Newtown School.
Yes, right? But think about it. It's this guy, right? He may have shot up a movie theater and he may have shot up a school. But the fact that we don't know that this is Adam Lanza and he killed 20 children is also contextualizing within this topic, and you'll see why. So how have the following students been categorized within U.S. discourses of criminality, right? So now I'm using Adam Lanza as an example of what I'm going to show you in the next couple slides as far as comparing who we know and who we don't know when we think about criminality and race. When you think of this student in the media, how has this student been portrayed? As a student or a criminal? How about this student? How about this student? This is Tamir Rice. This is Martise Johnson, University of Virginia. Criminal or student? Criminal, right? How about this student? Michael Brown, very close to where I am at the University of Missouri, Ferguson, Missouri, right? In his college, in his graduation cap and gown, right? Even then, we still see him more as a criminal because of U.S. media and discourses of race and criminality. So the images that I just have shown you show how young black and brown students were criminalized. And in these cases, the criminalization either led to their death or arrest, and where the victims did not ultimately commit a crime, right? In the case of Adam Lanza, we don't even remember who this person is anymore. And he killed 20 children, right? And that's the power of criminality. That's what Michelle Alexander argues in her book, The New Jim Crow, when she talks about that the term criminal has done more harm for black and brown communities than the actual policies of Jim Crow, right? And so a lot of her theorizing in that book informs how I understand access for students of color and how also whiteness is normed and hidden. Right? So racialization and criminalization contribute to college access for students of color and because of the pervasive discourses of race and criminalization. Right? So when we think about how racialization functions, when we think about college students, we always qualify it with terms such as underrepresented students, right? Disadvantaged students, underprivileged students, first-generation students. Those terms are usually codes for what? Students of color. Right? And so black and brownness is visible here, and it's related to deficits, right? We always say these terms, and we're familiar with them on a college campus, but what don't we say, right? Do we ever say overrepresented college students? Do we ever say advantaged college students, privileged college students, multiple generation college students, right? We never say these things because whiteness tends to be hidden. Right? And in my paper, I argue that's a social field, and it does construct geography. It hides the norm. So I think I'm imploring all of us to think about these concepts when we typically talk about underrepresented students in the debate. Think about the other binary, which is what we never talk about, okay? So now, I just want to make this statement, and it's, our bodies are racialized, but just as our bodies are racialized, so are our geographies and our spaces racialized as well. And that's what I'm really going to be exploring today. So the paper that I published with a colleague Julie White. It's called College Student or Criminal, a post-colonial geographic analysis of the social field of whiteness at an urban community college branch campus and a suburban main campus. And this paper is published in Community College Review, and it just came out in January. And so what we did is we actually combined two of our projects together. I looked at the spatialization of a county and the proximity of colleges and universities, and she looked at financial aid policy at the community college system. We combined our data and we came up with this, this paper, and it's a very strong analysis. So I'm really excited to share it with you all today. So my research questions are, how are community college locations racialized within a city and a county? And then, how does the social field of whiteness, again, really drawing from some of Michelle Alexander's work, function at a community college main campus and branch campuses? Right, so the literature, we know that the community college system enrolls predominantly students of color and low-income students, and we have the statistics here. We also know that students of color and marginalized students are overrepresented in the community college system. And we also know that the community college system is also stratified within the broad higher education system broadly, when you think about resources. We also know that different higher education institutions across urban and suburban areas have relationships to the city and county and their history of residential segregation. So my larger project looked at how higher education institutions were moving after segregation and during white flight in this county. So particularly four-year private institutions moved to the south of the county, and proprietary institutions, for-profit institutions, were actually located more in communities of color and low-income communities around the 1960s. So we have to understand that we have to contextualize access within the history and the local geography of a particular county and city. So when we think of access and choice for college students, we have to understand the local components and the dynamics, the racial dynamics and the class dynamics as well. So for my methodology, I used post-colonial geographic framework, and that's a framework that I actually conceptualized using post-colonialism as a broader piece, and then critical geography. And I'll go into a little bit of what post-colonialism is. So the focus of post-colonialism really is looking at how internal colonialism, so that's factors of how labor is stratified across Black, brown, and white populations in the US. It's also looking at how surveillance is used in these communities. So it's really looking at how colonization is still it's de facto functioning within the US, but also looking at like the fragmentation of the global into the local. Right, so if you saw that first picture I showed you, I think it was the first slide, looked like a city. So that city was actually Sao Paulo, Brazil, which was a favela. So as you see how the favelas are right outside of developed kind of high rises, right next to underdeveloped populations and housing. And so I'm always looking at how development is also framed within issues of the political economy, and looking at the dominant and subaltern discourses. And subaltern discourses are just non-dominant discourses and how they're functioning. And that's the focus of post-colonialism and how I compare it. So my data were based on for my methods I used in this paper, it was a combination of using ArcGIS, which is a geographic information system. So I actually use quantitative and qualitative data through cartography, and I created maps. I use census data, I use the campus locations and qualitative participant observations. I also looked at the 4 spatial units, which were the county, city, the campuses, and I looked at public transportation as a system. The quantitative and geographic data consisted of census data, and the variables were specific to race, and I looked at, it was based on census tracts. A second data set was created, which was institutional specific quantitative data, gathered through the Institutional Research Office. And then the qualitative portion was consisted of 26 bus rides that I conducted when I was completing the second part of the project, where I actually rode the bus from the lowest income, most concentrated Black and Latino community in this county to all of the colleges and universities in the county, and documented my experiences, how long it took me from getting from this community to all of the colleges and universities, and then also looking at what would the experience like catching different types of buses from one of the most impoverished areas, again, going into different parts of the city. And you'll see some maps where we can kind of contextualize some of the the spatial pieces. And yes, the public transportation system, which I call here city regional transportation system, is the only transportation system in this county. As far as the theoretical framework, again, remembering that my methodology is really looking at post-colonialism and dominant discourses and subaltern discourses, but my specific framework, I'm using Melissa Hargrove's social field of whiteness. And her work really drew on, she was an anthropologist that did work in the Gullah Geechee communities in the south of the United States, where she found that developing areas of Savannah were using tactics that were very colonial in oppressing the Gullah and Geechee communities, which were predominantly black, and gentrifying the community. And so I think, again, we live very close to Chicago, so we understand how gentrification happens. But she, again, looked at the social field of whiteness and how that's really white supremacy functioning geographically within these spaces. And so we have here, white supremacy is a system of domination that is invisible. Again, the fact that Adam Lanza, we didn't know his name, and the fact that he's invisible, and we don't remember that he killed 20 children, is a form of white supremacy and domination, how it's silenced typically, right? And also how dominant discourses create mechanisms of institutional racism and intersect other systems of oppression and domination, such as capitalism. Right? And then subaltern discourses, which is really what I was trying to get at when I was doing the bus rides, understanding the environment of subaltern communities, because we understand in the US, typically in areas like the Rust Belt cities, public transportation is a form of transportation that's typically used by more low-income black and brown communities. So that's really important to contextualize as well. So actually riding the bus is an experience of those who are more on the margins than those at the center. What were my findings? So my findings were that, so three major findings. One, that the urban student market and residential campus, of course, were influenced by residential segregation and campus racial segregation. And next it was that the busing system and the shelters in front of the branch campus and the main campus were heavily surveilled by police. Lastly, the presence of security checkpoints at the branch campus and not at the main campus was my last finding, and it supports how the social field of whiteness functions, and it's due to the structural diversity of each of the campuses. And so my first finding, urban student market and residential and campus segregation, is supported by some of the institutional data, which shows that the branch campus has about 2,000 students, and the main campus about 15,000 students. And so a little history on the campuses. So the branch campus was situated in the suburban area of the county, and you're going to see a map of the county where we can kind of contextualize the locations. The main campus is about 15,000 students, and the branch campus is about 2,000. The main campus was founded in 1968. Similar to a lot of community colleges nationwide, it was founded as a form of access, but it was founded in the suburban part of the county, which is predominantly white and wealthy. And so the branch campus was founded in around the mid-1990s, 1992, 1993. And so that has about 2,000 students. And where it was founded was in the heart of downtown, of the city under study, which has a pseudonym. And you can see the demographic differences, right? You have higher percentages of African Americans and black students at the branch campus, and a lower percentage at the main campus. Latino population is about 11, and then 7% at the main campus. We also see full-time students. There's more at the branch campus. And then when you look at developmental courses, as far as students needing extra help before they take on their core courses or college courses, you have about 29% versus 11% at the main campus. Single parents, 27% at the branch campus and 9%. And then unemployment rate, 22% at the branch campus. And as far as the EFC contribution, 61% were at a zero contribution at the branch campus, and then 28% of the students at the main campus. So we see that there are differences when it comes to issues of income, educational attainment, and issues of race. There are differences on the branch campus and the main campus. And so here's one of the maps where you can see here. Let's see. All right, so that's the branch campus. So you see it's right in the heart of the city, and this outlining here is the city boundaries, right? And then here we have. Oh, the light is gone now. Well, you can see that the second red dot underneath the southern part is where the main campus is located. And when you look behind the dots and you look at the different shadings, you can see that is actually the Black population of the entire county and the city. So you can see, and it's based on census tract. So these are actually the numbers of Black people, African American Black people in the county. So you can see there's a higher concentration of African Americans and Black residents within the city. And you can see it's very, very concentrated in the north part of the city and on the west side of the city. And on the south side and on the outskirts, you can see that there's a very, very low population of African Americans, all right? And if you have any questions, you can ask questions while representing. We don't have to wait till the end. And here we have the Latino population. And again, you can see where the main campus is on the outskirts, and then you can see that the branch campus is in the middle of the city. We see the Latino population is similar to the African American population as far as concentration within the city and not outside in the suburbs. And you can see again on the north side, there is highest concentrations of Latinos in this area in very close proximity to the branch campus. Now this is the white population, right? Very different, right? We can see that the white population, of course, we also know that there's more whites in the county. It's completely almost on the outside of the city. I mean, you can actually look at the boundaries and look exactly at where the boundary lines are and where the concentrations of white residents start and emerge. So at the core, you can see that there is a hollowing of the white residents in the white community. And again, it's important to ask questions about access and choice for students and really contextualize it to the local environment, the local community, because if not, we miss understanding and theorizing how access is understood by these residential communities and how the history of residential segregation, redlining, and housing also impacts where students think that they can go to college and what's really accessible, right? So I think this is really some context to my work. Yes?
I know you're looking at community colleges, but how those maps look like if you look for profit institutions?
Yes, great question. If I can use this now, it doesn't work. So if it was for the for-profits, I know exactly where they were. So the for-profit institutions, one was here above the middle dot of the branch campus. So if you follow that directly above it, there's actually one proprietary institution a little bit to the right and then one to the left. And then there's one all the way to the south. So you have two proprietary institutions and a community college in closest proximity to low-income communities and communities of color. Whereas, and so this is actually my other publication that's under review now, where I actually came up with this term called college desert and college oases, which really looks at how low-income communities, when you go to the center in this county of the north side, you see that within the 3-mile radius, you only have a community college and two proprietary institutions. Where if you go to the center of the highest population of white and highest income groups within the county, and you do a 3-mile radius outside of that center point, what we found was that there was 5 colleges and universities, right? There was 3 private universities, a public for-profit, and a community college. So that's what I coined a college oasis and a college desert, which is similar to like the food desert type of theory. So yeah, it follows along with access issues. And again, we have to ask questions about racialization. We have to ask questions about that because it's communities and geographies are not created in silos. They are part of these discourses of race that have impacted U.S. upward mobility for so many groups historically, and I would say globally. So the second finding was looking at the busing system and shelters in front of the branch campus and shelters in front of the main campus in urban and suburban areas. And so what I found here, and this is actually the busing system. So as you can see, I don't know how clear it is, so the actual orange lines are the bus shelters, the bus routes, and then you have, of course, you see the county and the city boundaries. But I'll just ask, what do you notice with the busing system as far as bus routes? Do you see a pattern? You could just shout it out. What is a pattern that you see? It's more concentrated in the city, right? So, which is following along with what I said as far as issues having to do with public transportation and low-income communities and communities of color typically are the populations that use public transportation. And in this case, it's evident that it functions more within the city. So what happens is on the suburbs, there is less bus routes going out to the suburbs, right? So the community college main campus is in the suburbs. And as you can see a little bit, there's maybe one or two bus routes that actually go to that main campus. Whereas the downtown campus gets every single bus route. So it's the hub of, one, the transportation system and the community college. So what we find is, what I found when I was doing my observation data is that area is highly policed, highly policed. I did 26 bus rides, and at every point I saw police presence in those areas. And so I asked questions about, well, how are we understanding the experiences of students who are catching buses to go to this campus, let's say, and not going on the outskirts, and understanding that their experiences are already criminalized prior to them even entering the campus? So what does that mean as far as access for these types of students? How are we understanding students? And how are we criminalizing students? Again, how are we seeing residents more as criminals versus students? And I would argue, people may say, well, there's more police presence because there's more crime, right? But we know that's not the case. We know that crime is socially constructed. We know from many of the data on the criminalization of Black and brown communities that laws were created, drug laws were created as a form of segregationists trying to, again, segregate particular communities. And I'm really informed by Michelle Alexander's work, and I think it's evident in access, and I think it's evident in higher education as well. And so here what I did was I actually mapped the actual bus shelters. And so my experiences here, where you see the main and county bus area, that's the area that had the highest police presence. So you had 4 bus shelters, and you have the community college right behind one of the points, right? Then you had the main and St. Peter bus area that was not surveilled, even though it was 2 blocks down. And then you have the suburban bus area that was to the south and maybe about 4 blocks away, no police surveillance. And actually the suburban bus area was the cleanest. The buses came on time. The buses that you rode from those areas were very efficient. They had storage for backpacks, whereas the buses that came to the Monroe, the Main and County area, you didn't even have racks for residents who had babies, and they'd had strollers. There was nowhere to put any of this. And so, again, the suburban bus area, which had actually more, I would argue, it was more diverse, right? So whereas Main and County and even Main and St. Peter had predominantly Black and Latino bus riders, in the suburban bus area, you had probably, mostly all of the white bus riders were in this area. Even though it was a small percentage of them, there were more in this area. Because this bus shelter was the bus shelter that all of the buses that went outside of the city is where those bus shelters, that's where the buses went. So again, looking at our population, most of the white population lives in the suburbs, so that's where they would catch the bus in order to go into the suburbs. Any questions thus far? Okay. So geographic information systems is actually a really great tool to show qualitative data and quantitative data. So the quantitative data are the census tract data that I showed, but the qualitative is actually what I'm showing you now. The fact that I can geocode bus shelters and place them geographically on a map and aligns with streets and blocks. That's the qualitative approach that you can use. And I would argue, yeah, this is quantitative, this is based on that, and this is qualitative. So the presence the presence or not of security at the entrances of each of the campuses was my third finding, and also again speaks to my larger discourse of the social field of whiteness at both campuses. So what I found, so I've already said how the bus shelters were already very, very surveilled and policed when we left, when we looked at the branch campus, and it was not the same way at the main campus. And for this last finding, I was observing how when you had to enter the campuses, the branch campus had surveillance, right? So it had actually a checkpoint. So you could not enter the branch campus without going to security and metal detectors and being ID'd. And I actually asked the security guards, why is it that this campus has police surveillance, has security, has metal detectors? Why are we ID'd when we come into the campus and not at the main campus? So the main campus, you can go into 3 or 4 different entrances. It was a bigger structure. I mean, the downtown campus was smaller, but more, it was based on maybe 1 or 2 floors of a former Sibley's building. And the main campus actually looks like a college campus. So there's even differences in the spacing, as far as one looked more like a department store, a former department store, and one looked like an actual campus, based on what we understand a campus to look like. And so the other one had only one main entrance, and this main entrance had security. And so what the security guard said to me was, well, the reason we have security is because we're in the downtown area, and there's, we have to protect our faculty, and we have to protect our students. Protect our faculty and students from what, right? And again, there's this whole idea of there's more crime, and because there's more crime, we need more surveillance and police. But I would argue that I think people think that there's going to be more crime if we don't have police, but I think policing actually makes people more paranoid and fearful to even come into the campus. And so again, how are students seeing themselves as students, right? And this is supposed to be college students. Similar in the K-12 area, where there's security checkpoints and there's metal detectors at schools where children are going into. This is happening on college campuses as well. And it's happening at more likely community college campuses, which tend to have, again, higher proportions of Black and Latino students and low-income students. So this is very racialized. And if we want to provide access to all of our students, we have to really see, and I'll talk about my implications of the study, we have to really reform how we understand access and the kinds of policies we have in place when it comes to policing and surveillance of our students.
Did you have an opportunity to talk with students?
I did not. So this was just participant observations and the geographic data. Yeah. No, I did not. But that's a good question. Maybe it's a follow-up study. So for the conclusion of this study really is that the social field of whiteness, right? Whiteness functions here, it reifies racial and class divisions between the community college's main campus, which is predominantly white, and the branch campus, right? So it tends to criminalize students via this pervasive police presence and of the entrance of the urban college campus and then bus shelters nearby, and it reveals there's a bias. And so whether it's unconscious or not, whether there's intent or not, doesn't really matter, right? What matters is that the social field of whiteness exasperates stereotypes of criminality when it comes to Black and brown students and not white students. Even though one would argue that because the main campus has more students, maybe 5 times the amount of the branch campus, that there's more likely to be a crime because there's more students, but they're not surveilled at all, even though there's 5 times the amount of students at that campus, right? And then they're young, right? People think that when you're younger, you tend to make more mistakes. But again, there was no police presence ever, and there was no metal detectors or surveillance or checkpoints. So the implications, I think there's 3. There's implications at the municipal level, there's implications at the institutional level, and implications at the federal and policy level. And as far as looking at the municipalities, I mean, we have to reform police surveillance and space. There was a particular case within this county and city where there was 4 or 5 Black students catching a city bus from their school to a game across town, and they were catching the city bus, and they were outside of the bus station, and they were arrested for standing in front of a bus stop, just for standing outside of a bus stop, and there were 5 Black students. The mayor found out about it, and they dropped the charges. It was actually made the national news, and it was an embarrassment to the county and the city based on our policing. So the fear was that these students were gathering together in front of a bus stop and participating in some type of criminal behavior. Again, just being Black and catching a bus is a crime. And we've seen these cases where being Black and doing anything that's normal is a crime. Being Black and asking for help, being Black and driving, being Black and walking from the store with Skittles. Those things are considered crimes when we live in the United States, where we have systems of white supremacy that guide a lot of what we do as far as understanding issues of access and policing. So we have to reform that, I think. It's a huge part of access is looking at how we traverse police surveillance when we're trying to get from one side of the town to another, and where a high school student or a college student, and all we have to rely on public transportation. At the institutional level, the data supports policies challenging institutional racism, campus entry points. Really, if you were an administrator at this branch campus, and my colleague was an administrator at this branch campus, and she actually tried to push policies against, trying to challenge these ideas that we need surveillance. But again, people think it's for the protection. And it's hard when not all of the administration believes in what I'm saying, right? There's scholars who say, facts don't matter sometimes. And we've seen examples of that often. But I think as researchers, we have the obligation to provide this research and data to the administration and push them to make change when it comes to challenging institutional racism in college campuses. Also, and again, public transportation is a big piece to that as well. At the state and federal policy levels, right, increasing appropriations to geographic areas that are similar to this campus, right, that have histories of urban decline, history of white flight, and again, high police surveillance, and really making particular residents subordinate to other residents based on their geography. So I think, again, this has implications for policy reform at 3 levels. And so the last thing I'll do, just to ask some of you, is now that you understand the study and some of my implications, how I theorize and conceptualize access, understanding how criminality works, and understanding how we understand what a college student is, how does this contextualizing of these terms, college student, criminal, right, inform our institutional perspectives, right, even here, on college access, on retention, on college graduation? So I'm just going to put that out. I'm going to ask you questions before you ask me questions. So I'm just getting your thoughts on how does this study inform, from an institutional perspective, how we understand access, retention, and graduation for students here at this university, for example. Any thoughts? Yes.
I keep thinking about the concept of social mobility or upward mobility.
Yes.
And for so many, education may be an avenue to do that. But going into that branch campus and seeing that, well, education just gives me the same things I'm seeing around if they're from the neighborhood.
Yes.
Kind of halts that movement or that looking at education as a way.
Yeah.
If it is a way.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I agree. Social mobility, support social mobility. Anyone else? Yes.
I was going to say that I was thinking about how students might be perceived different as like a college student or a criminal, even on like one given campus,
Yes.
based upon like maybe policing at different events that they know that
Yes.
a large population of certain students.
Yes, absolutely. So at our campus, the University of Missouri, I don't know if you're all familiar with what happened last fall at the University of Missouri, okay? So this is an example of that. The fact that students are being called the N-word walking across campus, students are being pulled over. You're more likely to be pulled over if you're black or brown versus that you're white versus being white. And also, this has implications for faculty and staff. I mean, once our students protested and made history as far as institutional change at the University of Missouri, I would argue that the next day, white supremacy really showed its face. How? Because you saw on social media how we were attacked, how our Black Cultural Center was attacked, how black faculty and staff were attacked, saying, we had threats saying that we're going to be killed if we went to campus that day. And so I remember having to have my class at my home and bring my students to class that next day, and having my white students crying and say, I walked to campus today and I realized my privilege to be able to even go to class and be on campus, and that I wasn't targeted. And so this has huge implications for campus policy change, a lot of implications for retention and graduation. If you're more likely to be targeted because of your skin color on a college campus, how is that going to impact your relationships with your professor, with your classmates? And so, yeah, it's important to really kind of contextualize our experiences, not just in the classroom, but outside of the classroom as raced beings. Yeah. Any other questions? Any other thoughts? Yes.
I'm a little bit biased, because I'm a geographer, but I think it sort of calls to attention the importance of space and how it's always political, and we
Yes.
can't take that for granted. So most universities, art ones, will have this discourse of sort of being multicultural on one hand.
Yes.
Yet when we look at the actual material, what's actually going on in the schools, there's been an increase in actual black and brown students on universities.
Yeah.
So we got to look through those sort of discourses.
Yeah, as far as having an increase of black and brown students on campus.
I mean, just in general. I mean, just that space and the protection of space is always, it's always political. There's always.
Yes, there's always political and social, economic components when it comes to geography. And that's why I think a lot of my work is very innovative, because we're not talking about geography in higher education at all. And I believe because these institutions are not siloed, right? These institutions have their history, right? The University of Missouri, our students pointed to the fact that University of Missouri is built on the back of black students and black people. And so how could we forget that? How could we not understand how that informs how we see our students, how we see ourselves, how we become complicit in these systems if we're not reminded, right? It's like this erasure of history in order to move forward, but it's always the history of those that are on the margins and oppressed. And so I think we have done, and I'm saying we as far as, because I'm with the students, right? We have done a good job of making that, vocalizing that we matter, that Black lives matter. And that's really, really key on a college campus. Because if Black lives don't matter, then no lives matter, right? So, yeah. Any other thoughts?
I was just
Yeah.
wondering whether you closed the loop and looked at some indicators of quality, meaning average class size in branch and main, qualification of instructor, average years of experience. Have you looked at that? Because I have a hunch that they're not going to be.
They're not going to be the same. So we're working on a follow-up piece to this piece that we got published. The second piece is looking at financial aid discourses, and the administration and staff and students' perceptions of the campuses. And so that preliminarily the data show that there's less resources at the branch campus, that students at the branch campus actually feel that they're racialized. It's actually seen as the high school campus. It's not really even seen like a college campus. Students are not provided the services that they need at the campus. They're under resources. Again, very similar discourses to what's happening in K-12 public education. So it's very similar in the community college sector in this one case. So I would argue that most likely, and as far as majors, the types of majors at the branch versus the majors at the main are very different, right? The ones at the branch are specific to like social work, public safety, which I thought was really interesting. And at the main, you have a slew of options and choices. And of course, all of the organizations, student organizations are on the main campus. And if you think about it, the main campus was founded in 1968 to provide access to the city, but the location that it chose was a suburban white community. So for about, let's see, 1968 to 1993, so there was at least 20 years where the city did not have any access to community college education or for profit. And for those 20 years, there was no access, especially if you were on the bus line. So absolutely, geography matters even where they decided to create the campus. Yes?
I'm curious a little bit about the end result of the students. So they get their 2-year degree. How many go on to a 4-year institution from the branch and the main? What kind of preferred occupations do they get with the two? Is there a differential there? And does it allow greater access and mobility with whether you get a degree from the branch or the main? So I'm kind of with Fuad in the sense of kind of closing that loop.
Yes.
So how do the courses articulate to a 4-year institution? Are there pathway programs into a 4-year institution?
Yes.
Is there a differentiation between the branch campus to the main campus and everything?
I'm not sure about those data. I didn't collect that data, but again, something that we can follow up on. But I can tell you that as far as articulation agreements, from the 2-year to the 4-year, the main campus is the campus where that happens. So if you wanted to have it, it's like a 2+2 thing. So if you can go to the 2-year institution, it can transfer seamlessly into a 4-year college or university within the area. That happened at the main campus. But the branch campus, you didn't have any counselors or programs that were designed to help students with these articulation agreements. But at the main campus, it provided those resources. So again, a lot of the student affairs programming, were more at the main campus. I think the branch campus only had maybe 1 or 2 offices that worked with students, and most of it had nothing to do with like articulation agreements and transfer options for students at the branch campus. So yes, I mean, if I had to hypothesize, I would argue that the main campus, under-resourced, and the second piece is going to talk a little bit more about that, but I didn't get into those exact data. But it's something that we can follow up on for sure. Yes?
I was just wondering, is there any difference in terms of admission policy between the main and the branch campus? Are both using open admission?
Both use open admissions, yeah. So most of the admissions, which is interesting, most of the admissions go through both campuses. But if you're closer to the branch campus, there's more of a wait time for the testing and things like that. Again, because they're under-resourced. So even students are feeling like they aren't, they're lacking something if they're not going to the main campus, if they're at the branch campus.
Yes.
When I think about, what are you pointing at?
And then in front of you, then you can, then in front of you.
When I think about students who attend elementary school or middle school that have the wands that go through them and the police and the guards.
Yes.
And then they finish that and they go to a junior college and they have the same sort of thing. Do they almost normalize this kind of, this police state when they attend these colleges? What sort of impact does that have on their thinking about higher education?
Absolutely, and also there was some more data I collected on the bus. So I was on all of these different buses, and again, there was I actually ranked the types of buses. There was 3 types of buses I rode on. One, had very little, storage space. Again, so if mothers were coming on the bus with their babies, it was really hard for them to sit on the bus and like the stroller would go up and down there was nowhere to put anything. Whereas in the suburban buses, they had lighting, elevated seating. It was just so inequitable. It was just, and if no one was doing this research, you would never know that there was 3 types of buses. One for the suburban area, one for the city. There was one that was like in the middle, which was a little bit more to like upper, kind of like middle class areas of the city, but it aligned completely across race and class lines, the busing, the types of busing. But what I was gonna say to your point is that the buses that I ranked on the lowest area level as far as they weren't as clean, they didn't have storage space. There was advertising on the bus. Each of the buses of the 26 buses had different types of advertising, right? And the buses that were coming from these lower income communities, their advertising, guess what the advertising was, if you had to guess? Advertising, signage. There was signage on each of the buses. Any idea? It goes along with this piece as far as criminalization. There was signage on these buses that said, turn in your guns, we're watching you, because there's video surveillance in the bus. But on the suburban bus, there was no signages whatsoever. I mean, I think I found a couple on that in that middle ranking bus, the 2 or 3 buses that were in between the lowest and the highest ranked buses. But even the signage on the buses criminalized you as soon as you walked in, right? So there was proprietary, and I was looking at college advertising on each of the buses. The college advertising on if there was college advertising, it was to the proprietary institution, all right? So there was even those types of signs, and I'm always looking at discourses, right? These discourses that we get, these images that we see when we're in these spaces influence our thinking as far as who we think we are and what we're capable of. Oh, wait, 1 second, no, you're and then you next.
My question relates to your third finding, is the security checkpoint.
Yes.
Who decides which school will have those security checkpoints? Is it the school decision or the city decision or state decision?
School. It's based on the school, yes.
I mean, do they have to provide any reason they have to do this? Or?
I'm not sure, but it's specific to the school. And again, because that area is highly policed on the outside, I would argue that the administration probably made a case to have surveillance on the inside. Yeah. But it's institutional, yes. Yes, and then you, sir.
As I sit here and think about, you talk about discourses, I think about, so as you look at multiple community colleges that are located in urban areas and versus suburban areas, it's less about transfer percentage and more about the chosen foci of the community colleges, because crosstalk is about the 5 foci of community colleges. And if there are community colleges or branch campuses that are located in urban environments, there are disparities amongst what that chosen mission is.
Yes.
Does that influence what people think their access is? And less about the percentage of transfer, but what that chosen mission of that branch campus is. For example, workforce
Yes.
versus a transfer focused mission.
Yes, and I would argue that this campus, their missions aren't not different.
Okay.
And even when you look at IPEDS data, when I try to collect IPEDS data to look at the branch and the main, they don't separate the data. So even in access of data, you can't desegregate branch and main. It's all in the same. So my colleague had to collect institutional data from their office to get this data. You cannot get the data that I showed describing the demographic of the branch campus on IPEDS public data. So not only do they not have different missions, but they don't even desegregate the data. So if someone didn't live in that community, that's why it's so important to have that local context. If you didn't live in that community, if you don't know that community, you don't even understand that these because the data don't show that. It makes it seem like they're all coming from the main campus. Yeah. You, sir?
Yeah, I'm really happy that you shared the information about the buses. I think most of the work with linguistic landscape or environmental print or signage, as you're calling
Yes.
it, looks at fixed spaces
Yes.
as opposed to transportation across those spaces.
Yes.
So I'm just wondering if you think, if you're going to go back and actually talk to some of the bus riders, if there are people that ride multiple lines, and if they're aware of things like what are the languages or varieties of language used in
Yeah.
that linguistic landscape and how that's also part of enacting who we are.
That would be
as
curious.
citizens of the city.
Yeah, actually, I remember when I rode the buses, I remember never seeing the same person or people or groups of people in the different ranking of different buses. It was particular types of groups that went on this bus. And I would see the same people on the same bus. If I rode it for a week or two, I would see the same types of folks that were on the same time, coming from work or coming outside of work. But yeah, it would be interesting to have conversations with the bus riders themselves, to seeing how they experience the busing system.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I teach a cultural diversity course in the college, and I'm thinking of sending some undergrad students on buses here to see what they can see on buses here.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot that happens on a city bus. I remember, even when I was riding a city bus, I thought there was a lot of disabled people who were on wheelchair, had wheelchairs, and so that, and even the interactions with folks with disability tend to have. It seemed to me when I was observing that when someone needed help, or especially like when the stroller was going up and down the aisle, there seemed to be a space for people seemed to be kinder and wanted to help. So there was one situation on the bus where the bus riders seemed to be meaner than the people on the bus. So there was one situation where someone forgot their bus card and wanted to get on the bus, and they got on, and it was cold that day, and the bus driver said, you don't have a fare, I'm not going to let you get on. And they're like, well, I'm always on this bus, I just forgot today. And so she drove about a block or two and she dropped him off. She wouldn't let him on. And then a bus patron says after they get off, hey, did they just need $1? I could have given them $1. Why didn't so I thought, like, wow, that's great. We have a bus patron who actually would pay for another bus patron that didn't have enough money, but the bus driver didn't even really give him a chance. But again, this is one of the buses that were surveilled, so I bet you there's policy against helping bus riders who can't afford to be on a bus. So if anything, I found that there was these discourses of caring and helping that came more from a patron-to-patron type of relationship than the bus driver and patron. The bus driver seemed to have more authority and seemed to be regulating and surveilling. And so, but absolutely, that would be there's fascinating follow-up studies here, for sure. Yes.
I was just thinking out loud here, like if you had a chance to speak with the college or the campus leadership, if they had to close one of the two campuses using your spatial analysis, which one would it be? And then how would it advantage or disadvantage the other group? And I think somewhere in there, if they don't have kind of equal conditions and settings, then how do you begin that conversation then to say, how do we begin that process of equity or equalization? Because if the branch campus was closed, it would require a different kind of infrastructure to ensure that those individuals could make it to the main campus.
Yes.
And then how would they think forward, in that regard? Maybe to get them to think about the racial, not just discourse, but really those spatial analyses that you're pointing out,
Yes.
and that sense of privilege.
Yes.
So if you were to close one campus, which one would it be?
You already know the answer to that. I'm not going to answer. Of course. I would close the main campus. I would make the main campus a downtown campus. I would buy the whole, we would function within the building, right? I think that's important. I think that first of all, access-wise, I feel like we have more access downtown with busing. And I believe it makes the population more diverse, and it's more centralized. Whereas the main campus is not as centralized. So I think access-wise, as far as physical access, it would be more
I think
more
what
space.
this is saying is if you want resources to the branch campus, tell the others we're closing.
Yeah, exactly,
More
exactly.
money now.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah, I have a follow-up comment to that. So, when campus is located in the city, there are more internship opportunities for students. So it's not just that you have access to the bus system, but you have access to the companies, industry, professionals who can refer you to jobs like once you graduate. And I'm actually surprised that the students who go to the main campus in the suburb, they seem to not have the experience to take classes in the branch campus, because if they were to take an internship or independent study, they have to be closer to the industry, like, the company. So it makes more sense to actually have them.
But here's different. The assumption is that in the city, that there is opportunities as far as manufacturing, business, industry. So this downtown area has been completely underdeveloped. Most of the investment, so I have another paper that I'm doing now, which looks at the development of industry and opportunities as far as jobs and employment. It looks exactly like this map of the white population. All of the malls, everything's on the outskirts, whereas the core, there's barely anything. So that's the thing, that's why it's important to look at the history of these cities and how they're depopulating, right? How there was white flight, how there is lack of investment, but investing in the suburbs. And it's not sustainable, because what happened in this area too is that the busing system is I think, one of the reasons why the busing system is as inequitable as it is because it hasn't been invested in. In the 1960s, there was more of a pull to invest in the highway system, which of course provides more resources to car driving populations than folks who are riding the bus. And that's why there was an investment in the city. So they actually created the city highway system in a way so it can provide folks on the outside access to the inside of the city faster and quicker, but not thinking about how folks in the city are going to get outside quickly without a car. So there is this policy, kind of local municipal policy push to invest in development outside of the city, but not thinking about what it does and how it impacts local residents who are not mobile through car use.
We got time for one more question because we have a class that meets right after. Okay, Marie, and then Ms. Rock.
So I guess Dr. Discourses would help you get a better perspective, the students' perspective. But I would like to know your thoughts about two initial things. One is that it calls my attention that in your sample you have more women than males.
Yes.
And I wonder if you are hoping to find some specific differences by gender.
Yes.
How women, for instance, experience surveillance compared to
Yes.
males experience. And the second has to do with, so you're talking about how everyone experiences that surveillance.
Yes.
And I wonder if enrollment intensity would be also something that might impact students like gender.
Yes. I mean, I think the gender piece is absolutely critical. Again, even thinking about the busing and about moms on the bus and how they had children and how that impacts access for them. I mean, there's so many times when I was like, wow, I don't even know how you can hold a baby and in your bag and not fall over. I mean, it was a lot. And so a lot of people helped in those cases. But there's this whole idea of, when you think of college students, you're not thinking about that one college student who may have a baby, who may not have a car. So yeah, I think there's gender pieces. And I'm saying moms in particular because when I was doing the bus riding, that was something that I thought about most, was how it was not just individuals but families that were impacted by how the bus was so inequitable for these populations. But I think, yeah, gender-wise, I think there would be some really great data that could come out of a further analysis of this study for sure. Yeah, and surveillance, especially when we think about what's happening nationally with movements like Say Her Name, who talks about women and black women who have been killed by the police, and how how it's not being talked about because of how patriarchy functions as well, and how it's racialized. So I think absolutely there's space to have conversations about the gender dynamics within this kind of surveillance and policing as well.